Oh gosh. Oh, there's a crane directly over me. I hope there's not a lot of noise. I apologize in advance if there is.
Not picking up anything right now.
Okay, well, he hasn't said it on the roof yet.
That should have happened during the last one, so we could have talked about the distractions.
Exactly. Oh gosh. Okay.
One of the meetings I was in this summer, they're destroying a building on one of our campuses, and everybody in the building that was in the meeting, they kept turning their cameras out so everybody else could see the building being demolished instead of focusing on what we were doing. So the meeting ran a bit long.
I could show you the crane. Gosh. Okay, I have 3:30, so we'll go ahead and start. So good afternoon. Welcome to everybody who's joined us. Neil and I really appreciate you taking the time today to attend our session. We work together at Spartanburg Community College, and most of you are probably familiar with SCC, but we did want to provide some background statistics about our enrollment and our location. I'd also like to take just a minute to tell you a little bit about Neil and myself so you can understand how our departments collaborate. Neil serves as the director of SCC Online. He takes care of everything relating to online course delivery and administers the D2L Brightspace learning management system, which includes all the additional technology as well with publisher integrations and proctoring programs, etc. My role is working primarily with faculty to provide professional development opportunities and to support faculty members as they adopt new educational practices. Neil and I also work together with online course development and reviewing online courses to ensure quality design. Although the online learning shift last year due to COVID-19 was dramatic and overwhelming, some good things did result from that, and one of those things is what we're going to talk to you about today. I first started working with H5P in 2 transitional studies courses. So when I began to research for this presentation, I was curious how many college students are enrolled in developmental or transitional courses for our college. The Transitional Studies Department also includes college skills, which is equivalent to a first-year experience course and not a developmental course in the traditional sense. It's similar to an interdisciplinary course at other colleges. I found that nationally, first-time freshmen attending a public 2-year institution similar to ours, that 68% of students are enrolled in remedial courses in any field. And of those, 28% were enrolled in an English or writing course. I wanted to know how our students compared, so I reached out to our institutional research office at our college for more information about first-time freshmen beginning in fall semesters. 34% are enrolled, no, go back, Neil. 34% are enrolled in at least one developmental course. 26% were enrolled in English or reading developmental courses, and 84% of those first-time freshmen were enrolled in college skills. So we're pretty close to that national average for English and reading. As I said before, the shift to online learning was rapid. From March to July of 2020, the majority of our classes were taught online. Last fall saw a tremendous increase in online enrollment, and even though we were offering face-to-face classes at a reduced capacity, the students were still signing up for those online courses. Right now, we are still seeing large numbers in online enrollment for this fall. One big advantage to online learning is the ability to access content almost anytime and anywhere. Integrating active learning elements into your learning management system is essential to engage students and build interactions with the course content, and it really doesn't have to be that difficult. Digital tools for content creation can fall under many different headings: interactive elements, multimedia, multimodal active learning, and so on. The interactive elements created with digital tools can help instructors Develop a more learner-centered approach to instruction by allowing students to have more control over the activity. Students can apply their knowledge and skills through a variety of interactive lessons, which we'll learn more about in a few minutes. Learner control increases motivation by allowing students autonomy in their learning process. Examples of how interactive elements can increase learner control include the ability to utilize navigational buttons and receive immediate feedback either during or immediately following an activity. Designing interactive elements so that they're easy to follow creates a learning path that is clear and simple for learners. And with H5P activities, instructions and feedback can be as detailed as needed, or not. You have the ability to incorporate visual clues and include active learning elements such as hotspots. Creating interactive elements also allows you as the instructor another way to scaffold information by breaking down content into smaller parts. Scaffolding can increase clarity and allow additional opportunities to review or practice information. And of course, it can also help you catch a student when they begin to get off track and pull them back into that learning path fairly early in the learning process. H5P elements allow an instructor to select how and when information is repeated and provides a variety of ways to deliver content. All of these elements help reduce cognitive load for the learner. Inserting active learning elements to break up text can provide an opportunity to reset the learner's attention and provide a brain break in the content. Reinforcing content in a variety of ways can also help the learner move the information from their working memory into their long-term memory. H5P allows you to create interactive elements that involve strong gamification and micro-learning elements, and that help engage and motivate your learners. Next, we have a brief explanation about what H5P is and how it can be used.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, H5P, it actually stands for HTML5 package, but you don't really need, that's not really important. What is important about H5P is really its versatility and how versatile it is, and also how easy it is for people to get started with. So some of the reasons why we selected H5P was we were looking for something that was faculty driven. Susan was telling you a little bit about our areas. Well, you know, the two of us are the only full-time employees in those areas. I've got a part-time person. So we don't have an office full of instructional designers who can create custom activities for faculty. We really need something that they can take the lead on creating things, and then we can go in and support them with training or one-on-one help or troubleshooting. H5P gives us a wide range of activities. As Susan mentioned, we've got about 30 different activities that are set up on our H5P server that faculty can choose from. I'll show you those in just a minute. Web accessibility was a real important feature for us. The activities are designed to be accessible and follow all of the WCAG 2.0 guidelines. And so they do things like prompt faculty when they insert pictures to put descriptive text for a screen reader. They allow you to add captions to audio or video. And the activities also have keyboard shortcuts, so they're not just limited to being used by a mouse. H5P allows you to easily share and reuse and remix activities. So if you create an activity for one instructor, they could share it with another instructor. Or you might create an activity for one course and then make some modifications and use it in another course. You can also share it with the world. So you could make it, say, Creative Commons if you were working on an online educational resources project, and share it with the world. H5P works with what we already have. It works in our learning management system our faculty are already familiar with, so they can click a button and get started in creating or adding H5P. And you'll see how that's done in a little bit. And finally, it's easy. If you can create PowerPoint presentations, you can learn how to do H5P. You know, it does not require a lot of specialized knowledge like some of the really high-end multimedia tools require. So I'm going to show you a few H5P content types, and I'm actually going to pull up a separate screen. This is from our H5P server, and I'm just going to scroll through the list. I'm not going to try to read every single one of them, but this might, some of these might be ones that might be useful for what you teach. And we'll do an activity here shortly where we take one or two of these and build something, so you can see how easy it is. But there's a real wide range of activities. I think one of the biggest challenges of H5P is getting in and playing around with these activities and figuring out which ones are most appropriate for your, your objectives in your course. The good thing is, if you go to the h5p.org website, you can actually look at demonstrations of every one of these activity types. So you can take a look at them, and that'll help you narrow down what might be the best activity. These are the ones that we currently have installed on our system. So I'll let Susan tell you a little bit about how we've used it in some courses here at SCC.
Okay, so the courses that we initially worked with were English 031, which is a developmental English course designed to help students improve their writing skills, and College 103, a first-year experience course. And I see one of our instructors is here. Hey, Frederick. Most SCC students are required to take either College 103 or College 101 when they first start at our school. College 101, however, is a one-credit course and non-transferable. English 031 was a new online course developed during the COVID shift. As the course was being developed, we noticed an opportunity to utilize interactive elements with H5P to replace some of the assignments. With both courses, English 031 and College 103, the instructors are very willing to try new techniques and pilot content that fosters student engagement. On this slide, you can see a homework assignment for English 031. This is the original Word document that was posted in the course. Students were to download the document, complete the assignment, then submit the assignment in D2L for a grade. Now remember, I said this is the first time that this course had been taught online. So this is a worksheet that was used in a face-to-face class originally. Since this course is designed to help students improve their writing skills, we thought an H5P activity would be an excellent opportunity to allow students more time to practice the material before submitting for a grade. On this slide, the image on the left is the H5P drag and drop activity that replaces the original Word document. Students are given unlimited attempts to try this practice activity before completing the graded quiz that's shown here on the right. The quiz is also an H5P activity. The quizzes in this course are low stakes, which is our recommendation if using H5P activity as a graded item. And Neil will probably talk more about that later in the presentation as far as quizzes go. For the college skills course, we created a collection of videos to introduce students to the different departments on campus, which was really important at this time because of the pandemic and our limited class sizes. We feel going into the fall, it will still remain a good practice for delivering equivalent content to our online students where enrollment remains high. So after recording the videos, we used H5P to create interactions throughout. The video plays and then a question will pop up after, a couple of minutes, and then it plays for a few more minutes and another question pops up. The screenshots that I have here show the interactive video start screen, a sample question, and then the final screen where the student will submit all their answers. More recently, we took a financial aid pamphlet and converted it to an interactive book using H5P. This is also for the college skills course. This is the original pamphlet that was being used. On the next slide, this slide, we see the interactive book provides lots of opportunity for engagement. So we took the text from the pamphlet and we created an interactive book. Even where there is text, it's visually appealing. We added Creative Commons images, and some of the added interactions for the book include hotspots, video, drag and drop, and knowledge checks, which are multiple choice questions. The book isn't in its final version yet. I think we still want to add some more questions to it, because if we can get all the questions from the previous worksheet that went along with the pamphlet, then we can completely do away with the worksheet for that assignment. The next slide provides an example of the report activity that's available through H5P. As the instructor or the creator of the activity, you can see the student's name, but I took that off for this presentation. Normally, the student's name is the first category on the left side of the table. Then you see the number of attempts by the student with the timestamps showing when the student started and completed the activity, and their scores, first, last, and best. We found that students access the activities multiple times to practice the skill or increase their score, and that most students raise their score with additional practices. As we said earlier, prior to COVID, the English 031 course was not offered online, which gave us an opportunity to play around with new ways of delivering material. We conducted a survey in each course, English 031 and College 103, for student feedback. We found that across both courses, students had very positive feedback about the H5P activities, with 96% stating that they liked the activities, 100% responding that the activities help them learn or retain the material, and 90% responding that they would like similar content in other courses in the English. Oh, I'm sorry. And the English 031 students rated the activities of 4.3 out of 5 stars. On this slide, we pulled out some of the student feedback from the transitional courses student survey so that we could show it to you. Most of the feedback was really positive, with comments like, it made me feel more involved, it was easier to learn, it was easy to navigate, and I enjoyed it. One student did comment that she felt a little overwhelmed with the additional activities, and that raises a great point. When thinking about content, be sure that you're adding content that is purposeful to the course. It's fun to create content with any type of technology, whether it's H5P, Padlet, Kahoot, whatever, but just be sure that you're adding value to the course for the students with any interactive content or technology. Another course example we wanted to highlight is from Bio 210. Which is anatomy and physiology. Science terminology is really similar to learning a foreign language for many students. It's not a language that they use every day. It's Latin based, and it's just not easy. The A&P course includes a 29-page handout to help students study the vocabulary, which is extremely helpful, but it's also a little intimidating. And this is just a screenshot of what that handout looks like. One of our instructors, Dr. Garg, utilized H5P to create lab manuals for each topic. Next slide. Based off of that vocabulary handout, that 29-page handout. These lab manuals include a video lecture, and that is like an introduction to the topic. Sometimes more than one video is included. The ability to practice the terms and identification using a variety of activities like hotspots and flashcards with audio pronunciations. Next slide, Neil. This is just a screenshot of the flashcards, and you can see the first one says name the muscle, but there's an audio icon there. If you click that, Dr. Garg actually pronounces the muscle for you. And then when you flip it, it has the name. The instructors who utilized H5P content were also really positive with their feedback. As you can see here, creating the right type of content can create interest, increase interaction, provide variety, and be beneficial for both students and instructors. We have instructors and staff that are experimenting with H5P across many areas of the college. And it's not limited just to academics. The library, human resources, the bookstore, student disability services, marketing, the tutoring center have all expressed an interest in learning how H5P can benefit their areas. So we're really excited to see what will be developed and how creative our faculty and staff can be. Next, Neil's going to talk in more detail about H5P options and how it was implemented in our LMS.
Yeah. So H5P is, as we mentioned, it's an open source project. And so there are several ways that you can get H5P on your campus. Some are free and some cost money. As is typical, spending money typically gets you a little bit more in the way of functionality. So the first thing that you'll want to do if you have an interest in H5P is go to the H5P.org site, and that's their demonstration site. The accounts are free, so you can go there to look at demonstrations of all the different activity types. You can go on and you can actually create some activities yourself. So the hands-on activities we're going to do in just a few minutes, I made sure that you could do all of those on the H5P.org site if you wanted to go ahead and do those along with us, or you can do them in your learning management system if you're at a college that already has it, and you can also watch along if you prefer to do that. But anyway, so you can create a limited amount of activities and you can link them out to your learning management system through the embed codes. They also have the full documentation, which is very useful. And there are community forums, and that's why I recommend that everybody sign up for an account, because this is a place that you can go to ask questions and get answers to things, as well as also sharing your knowledge as you become more experienced with other people. So, but they aren't designed to host all of your H5P. So you will have to get an H5P server to do that. So there are some free options for server plugins. Those have less functionalities, but you can set up H5P on a web server like WordPress or Drupal. That's something typically your IT department can help you with, or it is pretty easy to go out and for a pretty modest yearly fee, get a web host that has that already installed on it. And then you go to H5P and they've got the documentation for how to set it up. When you do that, you can create your activities there and then you can link them to your LMS. But what you don't really get from doing it in WordPress or Drupal is you don't get the connection with the gradebook and being able to see completion information in your learning management system. There's a limited amount of statistics that you get, but it's all kind of anonymized since it doesn't really know who's going to that server to do the activity. But it's a good way to get started if you want. We don't have anybody in the system that uses Moodle as their learning management system, but they do have a free Moodle plugin that it does tie in with the gradebook and has a lot of the features of what I'm going to be talking about next, which is h5p.com. And this is what we went with at SCC. And so it's a company called Jubal. And they are very active in the development of the entire H5P project. But what the big feature of this is that you've got the integration with your learning management system. So you can create your H5P activities from within your D2L, your Blackboard, Canvas, whatever learning management system that you use. And then once you insert them into your course, you've got the options to set up whether you want scores to be reported to the gradebook or not. And remember, not everything needs to go in the gradebook. I mean, it is one of the great features of this. But you know, some of these activities are really make more sense just as purely practice for students to do. And certainly if you grade them, you want to do these as fairly low stakes activities. I mean, you could build a test in H5P, but you know, you're not going to have all of the features that your learning management system has for testing. And you certainly don't have, you know, like all the online proctoring features or things like that. So, but you have the advantage that you can put a short little quiz or activity right in the middle of your content. So it's a great way to check comprehension for students. Anyway, with H5P, you also can share your activities to public websites. So if you need to share things that you've created as part of a grant program, that's easy to do. Or maybe you want to create some H5P to go on your college website. You know, that's also an option as well. You know, there's things like the 360-degree virtual tour activity. And, you know, that might be very useful for creating a campus tour and linking that to your website. So they have a couple of options for how you purchase H5P.com. You can either buy it by blocks of creators, or what we did is we went with an unlimited license, and they determine that based on your FTE. And if you could go that way, that is really the best route, because then your faculty can start using it whenever they're ready. They don't have to ask anybody to set up an account. You don't have to you know, take accounts away if somebody hasn't used it in a while because you're about to run out of licenses. It's just there. And if one of your faculty members hears about it from their colleague, they can just jump in and start creating something. And the other good thing is using H5P.com, that helps support the development of H5P. The Jubal people put a lot back into the product. Into the project. You know, they do things like helping review the code that different volunteer developers submit, checking for accessibility and things like that. So it helps make H5P more sustainable. All right, this is what it looks like in D2L when you've got H5P. So you can either put your activities in your content when you're working in the editor and creating a document, or you know, other tools like announcements. There's the insert stuff button. You D2L folks will be familiar with that. And when you click on it, there'll be a list of different media types, and one of them will be H5P. And when you click that, then an H5P screen will come up, and you can either add a new activity to create something from scratch, or if you've already created some things, you can add them to your course. So that allows you to reuse something across multiple courses. Also, there is the option under existing activities to add H5P in, and that adds it just as its own item in the learning module. And that's how we add it to D2L, so that we can also make the item gradable. So if you're a Blackboard user, the process is pretty similar. In Blackboard, you'd go into your content, and then when you click on build content, H5P will be one of your options of things to add. And then it's just, once you click that, it's just like when, for those of us in D2L, you'll get the H5P screen where you can either choose to create a new activity or insert something that you've already created. So it's really pretty easy when you have this integration into your LMS. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to start with an activity. We're going to do a fill in the blanks activity. So I'm going to show you I've showed you kind of how you get started in your learning management system if you've got that. If you've been working in the h5p.org site, you would sign in and then just go here to content to create new content. So I'm going to do it in h5p.org for this one. And then I'll jump over to our h5p.com and show you a few of the extra features. So we're going to do a fill in the blank. So first thing we have to do in H5P is choose our content type. So there's our list. And so I'm going to use fill in the blanks. And you'll notice that as soon as we pick our activity type, D2L gives us a link for a tutorial. So we can get a tutorial on how to do this activity if we're new at it. And we can also click here for an example. So that's always here. There's a lot of built-in help. So we'll give this an activity. So I'm going to call this identity theft. We're going to start to build one of the activities here. And you can pick a graphic of your own. I'm sorry, I'm doing the wrong one here. We're actually going to do, we're going to do state capitals for fill in the blank. Our next one will take something from the financial interactive book that Susan put together. So, if you wanted to add a picture, this media area allows you to do that if you want to put it above the activity. But I don't think I'm going to need a picture for this. We have task description, which gives us the place to put the instructions. And then down here, it gives us the instructions for setting up the fill in the blank activity. So this is really easy to do. What I'm going to do in my text area here is I just start typing, and where I want the blanks, I'm going to put an asterisk around the word. So I'm ready for my blank. I'm going to put the asterisk. I'm going to put the word Columbia, which is what I want the student to type in. And then I can put my period after it to finish the sentence. And I can do more than one of these. So I'll put my asterisks around the item. So now I've got the second one. Okay, so we've got a quick little fill in the blank activity here. You can have multiple blocks of text if you want. And then we have an area to set up the feedback. So if you want to give specific feedback based on their score of the activity, you can use this area to set ranges. And then within each range, then you have a field to put in whatever that feedback message is. So, you know, great job or try again. Behavioral settings allows us to choose whether students can retry an activity and do it over and over, whether you allow them to see the solution, and then there'll be other options that are specific to that activity. And so we would just go through and choose the things that we want or don't want. We even have the option to accept minor spelling errors, and they've got some rules for how far off they can be and still get credit.
Neil, you can also include optional spelling versions.
Yeah, so you'll do that. They mentioned that up here with a /. So if you've got, maybe if you were doing something that had to do with colors, you could spell gray, G-R-A-Y /G-R-E-Y, and then it would know to do accept it either way. That's a good point. And we don't have as many options down here in this display options area at h5p.org. But when we go to h5p.com, we'll see some more options for how it works with our learning management system. But let me go ahead and save this so you can see what it looks like. So here we are. So we just simply type the word. Type this one. Capitalize it. And I'm going to put one that's incorrect so we can see what happens. And so then the student would just go down and click check. And it tells me I got 2 out of 3 right. And so I turned on the option to do a retry, or I can show the solution. So there's the solution. So, you know, as Susan said, this is really good for practice for students to be able to do over and over. So let me go into H5P or H5P.org, and my Zoom toolbar is in the way for what I need to do. And so I did this activity in h5p.com. So we've already seen this. This is pretty much the same. But if we go down and edit, give it just a second to load everything in. So down here, we have some additional options. And this LTI settings, this is where I can set up whether this goes to the gradebook. By default, we have ours set not to send the score. When we got it, the default was actually set to always create a grade item for every H5P activity. And we figured out very quickly that was not a good thing because people were having to clean out their gradebook from all these activities for, you know, things that they didn't really need a grade for. So that's something that the H5P administrator can change. And I think they have actually changed that so that out of the box that's set so that it doesn't, but that's something you'd want to check after you get it. That was one of our lessons learned. But you also have the option too in h5p.com, you can set collaborators. So if Susan was going to help me on this, I could add her as a collaborator and then we both could edit it. So this is great for departmental use where maybe a whole group of faculty are working together on an activity. You can just go in and add them all in. Collaborators. So, and then we have publish options, and that allows us to choose whether it's just in our learning management system or if we make it public to put on our website or share with people outside of the college. You've got a lot of control over who can use the H5P that you create. All right. Well, now that I've done this, I'm going to go out. Yeah, we're going to leave it. And let's go ahead and I'm going to go into D2L and I'm going to do one from there for the second one. But you can do this one in h5p.org. I'm just trying to show the different ways that you can do this. So I'm in my content tool. And I'm going to pick H5P from existing activities. Now I'm going to go to add content. Right. And let me find an image hotspot. Let's see here. Let's just do A to Z. Okay. So you've seen an example earlier of the image hotspot where you put an image on the screen And then you can put little dots across the image and then have text appear when the student clicks on it. So very easy to set up. We're going to give it a title. Call this identity theft. I'm going to add my image. So then let's go here, pick the image. And if you're following along, you can pick any image on your computer you want. We're not creating a real activity for our students. So even if it's the little koala bear that comes with Windows, you can maybe do an anatomy activity for them or something.
Neil, can I just point out one thing?
Certainly.
You can edit the copyright right here on the image, and it gives you a lot of options, which I thought was really nice. It gives, so this would be your alt text information too, I believe. But if you scroll on down, it gives the source and the license. So if it's a Creative Commons license, you can identify that. So I just thought that was a really nice feature to have for an image.
Yeah, it definitely is. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating hotspots. And so the first thing I need to do here is actually find where I want to put my first hotspot on the image. So I'm going to go up here to where the little email icon is and just click on it. And now I see a dot. So I selected that location. And then the header, that is what's going to show if I move my mouse over it. So we'll call this email. And then pop-up content, we can choose either text, video, or an image. I'm going to choose text. And that, and then we can add another hotspot. So we'll click on this next one. It's a little social security card. So I just clicked on it. For my content, I'm going to choose text again. Inside the text box. Just put our message here. And that's really all there is to it to be creating hotspots. This is really pretty easy to do. And there's so many different subject areas where this is useful. So I'm going to go ahead and save and insert it, and then we'll take a look and see what it looks like. This is what it looks like in D2L when I add it to a learning module. And obviously we build more hotspots. I think Susan had about 7 or 8 on here. Click on it. That's what you get. So I can look at each of these. Anything else you want to add about creating image hotspots, Susan?
Not really. I think there are a lot of different ways to use it, like the way they're used in the biology courses. Um, like this, for example, instead of, this was like a bulleted list in the pamphlet. So instead of more text, I just converted it to an image that was interactive. I have seen some math examples where they're identifying angles or they're identifying points on a graph. So there's a lot of different ways you can use it.
And when you're using it in your learning management system with h5p.com, if I'm the instructor or one of the collaborators and I view it, I'm going to see an edit button. My students wouldn't see that. And so I could go back in and continue editing this item, or if I saw a mistake, I could click on there and go in and fix the mistake.
Yeah, and I guess, Neil, the report only shows if it's a graded item, or is it, because the report button would be right beside the edit button there.
I think yes, you would need to.
Needs to be graded
Yeah, I don't think it tracks that information
if it's not. Yeah. So if you have a graded item, you would be able to pull up that report that we showed earlier.
And if you did want to track something like that, but you didn't want to issue a grade, you could always build a category in your grade book that has a weighting of 0% and just call it practice activities and have it there. Or you might even hide that from your students if you didn't want them to see the whole list. But that would allow you to do the tracking. So, and also too, when you send the score, you do get to choose whether it's the first attempt, the last attempt, or the best attempt. And obviously that's going to depend on your purpose for it. Something that's graded and might be a little bit higher stakes might be just first attempt. Just depends. So, and they do warn you that there are some ways that you can get around this. This does not have the same level of security as the quiz tool in your learning management system, or using something like HonorLock or Respondus, or things like that. So just keep that in mind. So I mentioned before, one of the lessons we learned was to set H5P so that it doesn't automatically create grade items for everything that people start to create. Training is important. I mean, it's pretty easy to use and there's a lot of built-in help. But we've offered multiple H5P workshops and recorded them. We're working on converting that into some self-paced training. But and we give our students sandbox courses so that they can play around and experiment, because I think that's probably one of the best ways to learn this tool. One of the other things that we've worked on is creating a college-wide shared folder in H5P where we can put activities that we want to be able to share. And then if somebody wants to adopt it in their class, there's an option to go in there and actually clone the activity and make a copy of it and put it in your account so that it's just tracking your students. Or maybe you want to go in and edit it. So, of course, it's important to get feedback from both your faculty and your students like we've done. We've got some information about how to search for H5P activities online. I will tell you that they are in the process of implementing actually kind of a learning objects repository within H5P so that you can actually go out and search for content that other people have shared. There's not a lot in it yet because it's pretty new. But there are some search techniques that you can use to find activities over the internet. I know you've done more of this probably than I have, Susan, but this is using Google with the advanced searching features, and actually searching the h5p.org forums. And I'll post the URL for our presentation website, and this information is there. So there's a little bit to absorb the first time, but it's a good way to go out and find some resources that people have already created and shared publicly for your discipline, either as things to use in your course or things to give you some inspiration. And these are some other resources, and we'll have them up on the website.
Yeah, a lot of the information you'll find if you search or if you use these websites is going to be Canadian, because the Canadian university system has evidently bought H5P for everyone. So they have a lot of really good content at these websites. And really just, you'll notice the spelling differences, but other than that, a lot of it's going to probably show up as coming out of Canada.
Yeah, the H5P Kitchen's a really good site to go to, and they've got some recorded workshops on their site that are also quite useful. But there's constantly new things coming out about H5P as more folks start using it. It's not just limited to D2L. You've got people using it with lots of different learning management systems, and now that it's built into Moodle, that's really increased the number of people that are using H5P. If you go out to YouTube, you can find all kinds of tutorials, and I'd say probably 75% of the ones I've seen are kind of directed at Moodle users because it's already right in there. But even with those, there's still a lot you can learn from them. As I've worked on different activities, I've pulled some of those up and watched people build things or to get some ideas or to figure things out. And there's a great, the h5p.org community forums are also very helpful for getting information from people and learning more about how people are using some of the activities. Anything else that you want to add, Susan?
I don't think so. I think we covered it. If anybody has any questions, you can either unmute and we'll be glad to talk, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read them from there.
Okay.
I did put the link to the presentation website in the chat, so you can click on it. Makes it a little easier.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing so that we can see everybody.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
This is a quiet group today.
It's the end of the day.
Oh. Well, thank you, Akash. And we appreciate all you've done. Akash has done a lot with H5P here. And so most of those science examples, I think all of them that we showed were his creations.
Yeah. Yeah, and flashcards are great. I put some flashcards in one of our transitional reading courses because they have vocabulary to learn. So I put them in there, but I didn't have to make the audio files to go with them like Akash did. So wasn't as much work. And we have several college skills instructors with us today. So hey. So in the future, if you start playing around with H5P and you have questions, you're welcome to contact Neil or myself. We'll be glad to talk with you and answer any questions you have. It's really kind of fun. The hardest thing about it is selecting the right activity. Once you have the right activity, it's just a matter of, putting in your information and deciding how you want it to look.
Yeah, I've had a couple people say, well, I started building an activity and then I realized this wasn't the right one. And,
Me.
backed out and then created something else. But,
Yeah.
That's part of the learning process for learning any new skill or tool. And, I would recommend starting small. Look at some of these more self-contained activities first to do things like image hotspots or flashcards or fill in the blank or, drag the word type activities. And then some of the other activities there are activities that allow you to aggregate these things. So the lab manuals that were developed, those were done as interactive books, which allow you to pull together all of these smaller activities and bring them into one. I just pull up here the H5P site, and when you look at these different activities, I'm just going to see. Let's see here. Some of the ones that let's see. So you've got the interactive book. That's one. The presentations. So,
I will add that most of the activities are standalone activities. So if you want to incorporate multiple activities, like you want a fill in the blank and a multiple choice question, you need to use something like the course presentation or the interactive book so that you can use multiple activities on different slides.
yeah, that's a good technique. Now, if you're not grading the activities, you can also create, an HTML page in your learning management system and intersperse that with text and then just insert activities where you want them. So that's also another option that you have. And I will say there's a few activities that you'll see listed on this site that we don't have turned on, and that's because there are some activities that some developers have created that aren't accessible yet, or there's one or two listed there that they've said that aren't going to be supported long term, so we didn't turn those on. But the ones that the H5P Drupal folks are contributing to, they're all accessible. So that's a consideration. And there'll probably be new activities in the future. That's one of the nice things about something that's open source, where yes, h5p.com is one way you can use it, but since there are other routes for people to use it, there's incentive for other developers to create new activity types and then share them with the rest of us.
Yeah, and I think it would work really well if you're using OER materials and you want to include like some formative assessment, like a knowledge check or something at the end of a module or the end of even just a page. I think you could do some fun stuff with OER materials to make them a little more interactive.
All right.
Okay. Well,
thank you everybody for coming this afternoon, and
thank you all so much. Have a good evening.